she never meant for anyone to know. Not the truth, not the night, not the secret that changed everything. Zanea Brooks was used to being invisible. In meetings, she took notes. In hallways, she stepped aside. In life, she learned early that silence was safer than being seen. So when her boss, the billionaire everyone in the city feared and followed, looked at her that night, she thought maybe it was a mistake, a flicker, a passing moment. But it wasn't. They had one night, no promises, no plans, just a rooftop in downtown Chicago, a few quiet laughs, and the kind of tension that makes a person forget who they are. By morning, she was gone. No text, no goodbye. She left a resignation letter on his desk and disappeared. And Kyle Maddox? He moved on, or at least that's what the headline said. But 3 years later, standing on the marble floor of a tech summit ballroom, he saw her again. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a little girl, curls wild, eyes too sharp, and a face that looked exactly like his. Zanea froze when she saw him. He didn't. He walked toward her like the rest of the room had vanished. When he stopped, he didn't look at her first. He looked at the child. Then his voice cracked. "Is she mine?" Zanea didn't answer. She didn't have to. He knew. That was the moment everything changed. Because the secret she kept all those years wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It wasn't even love. It was a child, a daughter he never knew he had. And now, the man who once said he never wanted a family was standing face to face with a family he never expected. She never meant to hide forever. But when you've built your life around silence, speaking the truth feels like setting fire to everything you've protected. And still, the truth had arrived. In the form of a little girl with her heart and his eyes. Zanea Brooks was always the last to leave. It wasn't that she enjoyed working late. It was simply the only time the office was quiet enough to breathe. During the day, Drexler Innovations buzzed with urgency, executives barking orders, shoes clacking. Across glass floors, interns bumping into each other trying to impress someone important. But after 9 p.m., the building transformed. It became still. Calm, like it was finally off the clock. That's when Zanea did her best work. She was in her cubicle on the 32nd floor, finishing a report Kyle Maddox had requested. The office lights dimmed automatically at 10. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. But she stayed, as she often did, typing line after line of data summaries. Her fingers moved quickly, efficiently, like someone used to cleaning up other people's chaos. Zanea liked her job, not because it was glamorous. It wasn't. But because it gave her order, stability, a routine. She knew what was expected of her. She knew how to deliver. What she didn't know was that Kyle Maddox was still in the building. She heard the elevator ding down the hall and glanced at the time, 10:27 p.m. Normally, she'd take the stairs when working this late. Something about the elevator at night felt too exposed, too risky. But her heels were starting to hurt, and she was tired. She grabbed her coat, slipped her laptop into her bag, and made her way toward the elevator. She wasn't expecting anyone to be there. So when the doors opened, and she stepped inside to find Kyle already leaning against the mirrored wall, she froze. He looked up from his phone. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. He looked exhausted. His tie was undone, the top button of his shirt unfastened. He didn't look like the powerful man the press fawned over. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. "Evening," he said finally, his voice lower than usual. "Good night, Mr. Maddox," she replied softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Still working?" She nodded. "Just finished." The doors slid shut. The elevator hummed for a second, then jerked slightly. They both felt it. Zanea grabbed the side rail. Kyle shifted his weight, then pressed the lobby button again. Nothing. The panel blinked. Then the elevator jolted and stopped moving. Zanea's heart skipped. Kyle let out a sharp breath. Of course, there was a pause. The kind that stretches awkwardly in a small space. "I'm sure it'll start up again soon," she said quietly, trying to sound calm. He looked at her then, really looked. "Have you always been this calm under pressure?" he asked. She shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Panicking doesn't change the situation." Kyle smirked, almost amused. "Maybe not, but it usually feels better." She didn't smile. He slipped his phone into his pocket and leaned against the wall. The silence that followed wasn't tense, just unusual. They had never been alone together like this. Not in 3 years of working for him. "I never realized you stayed this late," he said after a while. "I don't mind it." He watched her for a moment longer. "That's not an answer." She looked up, finally meeting his eyes. "I like quiet places." Kyle's expression didn't shift, but something in his gaze softened. "Do you live alone?" he asked. Zanea hesitated. It wasn't a question bosses usually asked, but something about the way he asked it didn't feel invasive. It felt curious, personal. "Yes," she answered. "It's easier that way." He nodded, like he understood. "Same." The elevator light flickered again. Still no movement. Zanea reached into her bag and pulled out a bottle of water. Kyle gestured silently, asking if he could have a sip. She handed it over. He took a drink, then wiped the rim with his sleeve and passed it back. "You're quiet," he said. "I've always been." "Why?" She blinked. "Because people talk too much." His brow lifted, surprised. "I like words that mean something," she continued, "not noise." For a moment, Kyle was silent. Then, "That's rare." She looked away. "I see your reports all the time," he added. "Sharp, precise, no fluff, always early. Thank you. You don't take credit for them either. I get paid. That's credit enough." He smiled faintly. Then he glanced at her right hand. "You always wear that ring," he said. She froze. "It's not a wedding ring," he clarified. "I know that much." She rubbed the edge of it instinctively. "It was my mother's." He didn't speak. "She wore it every day, even when she couldn't afford groceries. Said it reminded her who she used to be before life got hard." Kyle's voice lowered. "What happened to her?" "Life got harder." Another pause. The elevator suddenly shuddered. They both stood still. Then it moved. Slowly. A whirring sound, like the gears were grinding back to life. Kyle checked the panel. "Looks like we're back in business." They didn't speak again until the doors slid open on the ground floor. The lobby was empty. Quiet. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Kyle turned to her. "Want to grab a drink?" Zanea's heart fluttered once. Then again, he didn't look smug. Didn't look like he was playing a game. She surprised herself when she nodded. "Okay." He held the door for her, and for the first time since they'd met, she walked through it before him. The rooftop bar sat above a boutique hotel just 3 blocks from the office. Kyle said little during the ride there, and Zanea didn't push for small talk either. She didn't know what this was. A courtesy? Curiosity? A test? But when the elevator opened onto the terrace and the host greeted him by name, she realized this wasn't his first time here. Still, it didn't feel like a place he brought people from work. The lighting was warm, the music low, the kind of place meant for private conversations and shared silences. They were seated in a corner booth under a black canopy. Raindrops tapped lightly on the edge of it, never quite falling on the table. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, glass towers glowing in silver and gold. Zanea pulled her coat closer and tried to steady her breath. Kyle ordered 2 bourbons without asking what she wanted. Oddly, she didn't mind. She hadn't even realized she needed a drink until the glass was set in front of her. He leaned back, watching her. "You always look like you're thinking 5 things at once," he said. "I usually am," she replied, resting her hands in her lap. "You don't talk much at work." "I'm not paid to talk." Kyle's lips curved slightly. "You always answer like that?" "Only when people ask questions they already know the answer to." He laughed, genuinely. Zanea blinked. It was the first time she'd heard that sound from him, unfiltered, unguarded. It warmed her, in a way that had nothing to do with the bourbon sliding down her throat. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on the table now. I didn't invite you here for performance reviews. I figured. He held her gaze. You surprised me tonight, he said. You usually avoid elevators when you work late. I've noticed. I was tired. Lucky me. She raised a brow. You don't believe in luck. He tilted his head. True. But I believe in timing. A breeze rolled through. Her hair shifted over her shoulder. Kyle took a slow sip of his drink, eyes never leaving her face. Zanea tried to focus on the city behind him, but it was hard, too hard. He wasn't being flirtatious, not in the way most powerful men were. There was no arrogance in his voice, no expectation in his eyes. Just something else, something searching. You asked earlier why I'm an assistant, she said, surprising even herself. Kyle nodded once. I like the work. I like solving problems before anyone else sees them. I like being invisible. He studied her. You don't strike me as someone who wants to be invisible. I didn't say I wanted to be. I said I like it. Why? Because when people don't expect anything from you, they don't get to be disappointed. There it was. The truth. She didn't even realize she'd said it until it was out. Kyle's expression didn't change, but the air around them thickened. He didn't offer her sympathy. He didn't say that was sad. He just nodded slowly. I know that feeling. She looked at him. He swirled his drink in the glass. Everyone expects something from me, every hour of the day. A win, a deal, a solution, a show. He glanced out at the city, but it never feels like enough. Zanea said nothing. She didn't need to. They sat in silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that felt earned, like two people finally understanding something about each other they hadn't before. When Kyle looked at her again, his gaze had shifted. It was warmer now, more open. Have you ever wanted to just disappear? He asked. She looked down at her drink. Yes. Every day. Why don't you? Because disappearing only feels good until people forget you existed. Another pause. Then he said, quietly, I wouldn't forget. That stopped her. She looked up, sharply. He meant it. And somehow, she believed him. The rain picked up a little. Still didn't reach them. He leaned back. I'm not usually like this. Drinking with your employees on rooftops? Talking like a human being. Zanea allowed a small smile to reach her lips. Kyle watched it appear. Then watched it fade. He reached across the table, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't rushed. His fingers lingered just a second too long. She didn't move. Neither did he. There were rules, lines, expectations, but none of them mattered in that moment. They were two people, tired of pretending they didn't feel the weight of everything they carried. When he stood up, she followed. When he held the elevator door open for her, she stepped inside. They didn't speak on the way down, but when he glanced over and saw her breathing shift, shallow, uncertain, he reached out. His hand found hers, and she didn't let go. Zanea left before sunrise, not because she regretted it, but because she knew exactly what that night meant. To him, it was a pause in his routine, a break from control, an unexpected breath. To her, it was everything she'd spent years protecting herself from. Connection, intimacy, the illusion that someone like Kyle Maddox could possibly see her without expectations or conditions. She didn't wait for him to wake up. She slipped out quietly, shutting the door behind her as softly as she could. Her heart was steady, but her chest was tight. The streets were empty, slick from light rain. The sky above Chicago was the color of worn steel. She walked several blocks before calling for a car. She didn't look back. By 9 a.m., her resignation letter sat folded neatly on his desk. No explanation, no subject line. Just her name at the bottom, in calm, clean ink. She didn't pack her desk. She didn't give HR a 2-week notice. She'd already cleared out what little she had the night before. The people at Drexler would speculate, of course. Assistants didn't walk out like that, especially not ones with spotless records and glowing evaluations. But no one would say anything to Kyle directly. They never did. Zanea used a prepaid phone to book a one-way ticket to Milwaukee that same afternoon. She had no plan, just enough savings to survive for a few weeks. She'd been careful with her money. She always was. Growing up, she learned early what it meant to live on less than enough. When she arrived in Milwaukee, she rented a room in an aging duplex just outside the city. The landlord didn't ask too many questions. She paid 2 months up front. The quiet of the small neighborhood suited her. No glass towers, no polished marble floors, no sharp, assessing eyes, just chipped paint, birds in the morning, and neighbors who kept to themselves. The first 2 weeks passed in silence. She avoided the news, refused to open her email, ignored every number she didn't recognize. A part of her waited for Kyle's name to show up. Somehow, somewhere. It never did. She wasn't surprised. What could he have said? Thanks for last night? Why did you leave? Come back? None of it would have changed what she knew in her bones. Kyle Maddox was not the kind of man who chased people. He led empires, he crushed negotiations, and he built worlds from spreadsheets and steel. But he did not lose sleep over a woman who'd never even taken a full day off in 3 years. Still, the silence stung, and then the nausea started. At first, she thought it was stress. She had barely eaten. Her sleep came in pieces. But when 2 weeks turned into 3 and the sickness didn't pass, something inside her shifted. She stood in the bathroom of her small apartment, staring down at the plastic stick on the sink. 2 lines. She sat on the edge of the tub and didn't move for 10 full minutes. Her breath didn't come in gasps. Her eyes didn't well with tears. She just sat there, hands folded over her stomach, the echo of Kyle's voice playing quietly in her memory. I don't believe in family. I've seen what money does to people. I don't want kids. She said the words out loud, her voice low. Then she looked in the mirror and said something else. I'll do this alone. There was no breakdown, no panic, only resolve. Because Zanea Brooks had done harder things. She'd been abandoned before. She'd survived on less. She'd learned early on how to show up for herself when no one else did. So she did what she always did. She made a plan. She reached out to an old professor from her undergrad days, someone who once told her she should have gone into data analytics. He connected her with a remote contractor who worked with small startups needing systems help. It wasn't fancy, but it paid just enough. She changed her last name on every profile she had. Email, payroll, utility bills. She worked quietly, bought baby clothes 1 piece at a time, cooked simple meals, and began to build a life no one else knew existed. When the baby came, she named her Chiari, a name that felt soft but strong. A name that didn't carry her father's expectations or the city he ruled. Chiari was born with a head full of curls and a scowl that made the nurses laugh. But when she opened her eyes, Zanea's heart stopped, because they weren't hers. They were his. That same storm-grey, steel-cut color that Kyle Maddox carried like a weapon. Zanea held her tighter and whispered, You don't need him to become someone. She never once considered calling him. Not even when Chiari took her first steps, said her first word, or slept through the night for the first time. She told herself it was for protection. But if she were being honest, it was also pride and fear. Because if he came into their lives, he might try to reshape them, turn them into something sleek and sharp and publicly presentable. And Zanea had worked too hard to give her daughter a world that felt safe, soft, and real. A world without expectations she'd have to bleed herself dry to meet. So, she stayed hidden, quiet, and invisible once again, but not empty, not this time. Milwaukee didn't offer much, but it gave Zanea something she hadn't felt in years, breathing space. There were no high-rise towers, no polished marble floors, No buzzing work phones or back-to-back meetings. Her life became smaller, simpler, slower, and in that stillness she found peace. Her daughter became her world. Chiari was strong-willed from the beginning. She hated being swaddled, screamed every time she was put down, and refused bottles unless they were exactly the right temperature. She was loud, demanding, and absolutely breathtaking. Every time Zanea looked at her, she saw both herself and a man she didn't speak of aloud. But she didn't allow bitterness to take root. She chose instead to pour love into the spaces where regret might have grown. Mornings began early. Zanea would nurse Chiari as the sun crept through the window, soft golden light warming the floor. Then she'd tuck her into a sling and begin work, typing with one hand while the baby slept against her chest. She picked up projects wherever she could, data cleaning for mid-sized e-commerce stores, building dashboards for small non-profits, even writing documentation for a local co-op. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And more importantly, it was hers. She no longer lived under someone else's time clock. No dress codes, no floor numbers, no elevators to get stuck in. Just her and Chiari, making a life one slow, quiet choice at a time. By the time Chiari was a year old, she had a laugh that could melt tension on contact, and a stare that seemed to size the world up before deciding whether to trust it. Zanea taught her to clap, to point to her favorite blanket, to raise her arms when she wanted to be picked up. She also taught her patience, safety, joy in little things. Trips to the library became their outings. Walks to the corner store became field trips. On Sundays, Zanea would sit Chiari on the counter while she mixed pancake batter, humming songs from her childhood. They didn't have much, but they never felt lacking. Zanea made sure of that. Still, every now and then, a piece of the past would slip through. A tabloid headline on a grocery store rack. A voice that sounded too much like his in a podcast she forgot to skip. A Drexler Innovations commercial running in the background of a YouTube video. She always changed the channel, looked away, turned down the volume. Kyle Maddox hadn't reached out, hadn't come looking. She assumed he'd moved on, if he even noticed she was gone at all. And truthfully, that was fine. She didn't want to be anyone's momentary regret. She had Chiari. That was more than enough. But raising a child alone wasn't without weight. There were nights when the rent check cleared by pennies. Times when she couldn't afford to replace a broken stroller wheel. Moments when she looked at the empty side of the bed and wondered how different it might feel to have someone helping her fold onesies at midnight or warm bottles after long naps. Yet even on the hardest days, she never doubted the choice she made. Chiari didn't cry for more. She giggled over second-hand toys and wore her thrifted onesies like royalty. She danced to jingles on the radio and squealed every time they passed a dog on the sidewalk. She loved fully, boldly, the way children do when they've never been taught to fear the world. And Zanea guarded that joy with everything she had. By Chiari's second birthday, the duplex walls were filled with drawings, alphabet, magnets, and mismatched furniture Zanea had picked up at local yard sales. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself years ago, but it was solid, honest, and full of warmth. She even made a few friends, other single moms from a parenting group at the local rec center. Women who shared hand-me-downs and traded stories about toddler tantrums like war veterans. They didn't ask too many questions. Most of them had pasts they weren't proud of. What mattered was survival, and showing up for their kids day after day. That's what bonded them. Still, even in her little pocket of quiet joy, there were moments when Zanea felt the ache of absence. Late at night, when Chiari was asleep, when the silence got too loud. That's when the memories came. The rooftop, the warmth in his voice, the way he brushed her hair behind her ear like he'd been waiting years to do it. She hadn't seen that version of Kyle since. Not in interviews, not in media quotes. He was still the same to the public, powerful, closed off, sharp. But she'd seen something else, and part of her had carried that version in her chest for years. She shook the thoughts off. Most nights, She told herself those memories were just that. Memories, nothing more. Until the invitation came. It was buried in her inbox between an overdue invoice reminder and a preschool flyer. Subject: Data Analytics Contractor Request. Sender: Tangent Startups. Chicago Tech Summit. She almost deleted it. But the rate was generous, and the contract was short. 3 days. No travel expenses needed. Just her laptop, some availability, and the ability to synthesize user metrics for a panel of investors. She hesitated. Chicago. It wasn't far. Less than 2 hours by train. But it was far enough from the life she'd built. Still, the money would help, especially with Chiari starting preschool soon. She stared at the email for a full minute, then clicked accept. She didn't tell anyone. Not her mom friends. Not the preschool director. Not even herself, really. She packed Chiari's things the night before. They'd stay at a budget hotel near the summit venue. She'd take the baby to a daycare center that partnered with the conference organizers. Just 3 days. No drama, no past, just work. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her past would be walking the stage as the headline speaker. That while she packed diapers and wipes into a canvas tote, Kyle Maddox was rehearsing. A keynote speech just 6 floors above the room she'd be checking into. That their worlds were about to collide again, not with fire or fury, but with a glance, and a little girl caught in the space between them. If you've been drawn into Xania's quiet strength, if you've ever chosen peace over pain or disappeared to protect something precious, this is your moment to speak. Leave a comment below. Have you ever kept something from someone because it felt safer than the truth? Like this video if the story is gripping you, and don't forget to subscribe. Chicago didn't feel like home anymore. Xania had told herself it was just another job, 3 days of freelance consulting, a hotel stay, and a quick return to the safe, small life she'd built with Chiari. But the moment the train pulled into Union Station and the skyline came into view, her stomach tightened. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was memory. It was what she left behind. Chiari sat beside her on the window seat, cheeks smudged with graham cracker crumbs, her tiny sneakers swinging above the floor. "Are we here, Mummy?" she asked, her voice bright. Xania smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Yeah, baby. We're here." They took a cab to the hotel, a modest business suite just a block from the Riverwalk. Xania kept her head down as they checked in. Her ID still bore her new last name. No one asked questions. After settling Chiari in with toys and snacks, she reviewed her project notes. The summit organizers had sent a list of deliverables, data summaries, a feedback dashboard, and a short presentation slide deck. Easy work, clean, low pressure, and impersonal, just the way she liked it. That evening she visited the daycare facility partnering with the conference. It was bright and professional, filled with books, puzzles, and certified staff. She filled out the forms with her usual care, double-checked allergy, information, and showed Chiari the corner where she'd nap after lunch. The little girl clung to her leg. "Are you going far?" she asked. Xania knelt down. "No, honey. I'll be 1 floor above you. You'll play, Color, and I'll come get you right after snack time." Chiari studied her for a moment, then nodded. The next morning, Xania dressed simply. Black slacks, a fitted blazer, low heels. Professional, but forgettable. She left her curls pinned up and wore minimal makeup. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to work. The conference center buzzed with energy. People flashing badges, speakers, adjusting mics, tech assistants racing to fix last-minute audio glitches. Xania slipped through the crowd unnoticed, found her assigned table, and began prepping her slides. For a few hours, it worked. She was invisible again, until her eyes landed on the oversized banner near the stage. Keynote speaker, Kyle Maddox, 11 a.m. or main hall. Everything stopped. She stared at the sign. Her chest tightened. No, this couldn't be. She checked the date, the time, the speaker list. It was real. He was here. at the same summit, in the same building. She hadn't seen his face in years, not in real life. But there it was, printed in clean grayscale across the banner. Same sharp jaw, same unreadable eyes, same presence that pulled everything around him into his orbit. She tried to breathe, tried to tell herself it didn't matter. It had been 3 years. He didn't know she was here. He didn't know about Chiari. And he was unlikely to see her among hundreds of professionals crammed into a corporate auditorium. Still, her hand trembled slightly as she set her laptop down. The stage was 2 levels above. Her session wasn't until later in the afternoon. She could finish her reports, retrieve Chiari early, and leave before the keynote even began. She turned to gather her things, and that's when someone tapped her shoulder. Ms. Fields. Zanea looked up. A conference assistant smiled at her. "We've moved all vendor support teams upstairs to the breakout gallery. Sorry, last-minute change." Room 203. Zanea hesitated. That was 2 doors down from the main stage. She forced a smile. Of course. She moved slowly. Each step felt heavier. The hum of her thoughts turned sharp. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't prepared for proximity. In the breakout room, she sat up again, fingers working fast, trying to keep her mind focused. She kept the door slightly closed and faced the wall, away from the hallway. Voices drifted past her throughout the hour. Security, photographers, buzz, his name repeated like a rhythm, and then applause. The keynote had begun. She reached for her headphones, turned on soft instrumental music, and buried herself in her dashboard formulas. But 20 minutes later, a question cut through the hallway. Clear, confident, and unmistakable. Kyle's voice. She froze. Even muffled through the door, she recognized its tone, its weight. He was answering questions now. Something about AI ethics and corporate innovation. She couldn't make out the words, only the cadence. And then, "Thank you all for your time," he said. "I'll be around for the next few hours." The room erupted in claps again. Then footsteps, dozens of them. She didn't move. She waited 5 minutes before standing. She needed to get Chiari. She tucked her laptop into her bag, grabbed her badge, and opened the door. The hallway was crowded, attendees moving in different directions, coffee cups in hand, voices raised, and somehow, in all of it, he appeared, 10 feet away, facing her. Kyle Maddox. She stopped walking. So did he. For a moment, the noise around them fell away. He looked older, sharper, if that was possible. But his eyes didn't change. They moved to her face. Then to the badge around her neck. Then lower, down to the corridor where Chiari stood with a daycare volunteer. One hand in her mouth, the other clutching a construction paper drawing. Kyle's body stilled, his breath hitched. Then his gaze locked onto the child. She looked back at him, tilting her head in a way that was too familiar. He took 1 step forward, then another. "Zanea?" he said, barely louder than a whisper. Her heart stopped. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. His eyes were on the little girl now. On the way her curls framed her face. On the way her lips pouted with sleepy defiance. On the way her grey eyes, his eyes, blinked up at him, unknowing, unbothered, and impossibly real. His voice broke when he asked the question. "Is she mine?" Zanea didn't speak. She couldn't, but her silence said enough. She reached for Chiari's hand, turned toward the elevator, and walked away. She didn't know if he would follow, but she felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Like the ground knew, nothing would ever be the same. Kyle didn't move at first. He just stood there, surrounded by people yet entirely still, watching Zanea disappear down the hall with a little girl who carried his eyes like a mirror. The moment stretched. Everything around him became white noise. The chatter of attendees, the clicking of heels, the buzz of phones. It all dulled beneath the roaring in his chest. She hadn't changed much. Maybe softer around the edges. Maybe a little more guarded. But the same walk, same quiet presence. And that child, he didn't need a DNA test. He didn't need a timeline. He already knew. His hands clenched at his sides before he finally forced himself to move. Step by step, he pushed past conversations, murmured distracted apologies, and followed the direction she'd gone. Down the elevator. Across the lobby. Outside. She was there, waiting by the sidewalk, clutching Chiari's hand while calling for a car. Kyle stepped into view slowly. Zanea turned the second she felt his presence behind her. Their eyes locked. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look angry. She looked ready. For what? He wasn't sure. "I just need 5 minutes," he said, voice low. Zanea's jaw tensed. "She's tired." He glanced at Chiari, who was blinking slowly, her cheek pressed against her mother's leg. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said. I need to understand." Zanea exhaled. Her hand gently stroked Chiari's back. "I'm not going to take her from you," Kyle added, quieter now. "But I think I deserve to know what I missed." That did it. She nodded toward a bench a few feet away. 5 minutes. She scooped Chiari into her arms. The little girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, already drifting to sleep. They walked to the bench, and Kyle followed, each step unsure, heavy with questions. Zanea sat, cradling Chiari carefully, letting her rest. Kyle stayed standing. It was safer that way. "She's 3? He asked. Zanea nodded. "I would have helped." Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "You said you didn't want kids. I said I didn't want a family built on pressure, on fear. That's not the same thing." She looked up at him. "It felt the same to me." Kyle's hands went into his pockets. He stared out at the street. The city buzzed around them, alive and unaware. "I looked for you," he said. "After that night." Her brows lifted. "You didn't try very hard. I couldn't make it public. Not with the merger happening. And I didn't think you wanted to be found." "I didn't," she said simply. Silence stretched between them. "You could have told me," he said eventually. "I thought about it," she admitted. 100 times. "Then why didn't you?" Zanea glanced down at Chiari's face, softened in sleep. "Because I didn't want her to be a secret. And I didn't want to become one either." Kyle lowered his head. That landed hard. "I wasn't ready," she added. "Not to raise a child in your world. Not to explain why her father was too busy to be in the picture. Not to answer questions from people who wouldn't have seen her as anything more than a headline." Kyle slowly sat on the other end of the bench. "I didn't want to ruin your life," she said. "And I didn't want you to ruin mine." He blinked. "I wouldn't have—" "You might not have meant to," she interrupted gently. "But you would have. Your life is heavy, Kyle, loud, public. I needed quiet. She needed peace." He didn't argue. Because she was right. His world was meetings and cameras and contracts and strategy sessions at midnight. He lived by rules written in press releases and quarterly forecasts. It had never been built for softness, for bottles and lullabies and pediatrician visits. But still, he felt something ache in his chest. "Does she know about me?" he asked. "No," he nodded, slowly. "Does she ask?" Zanea paused. "She's starting to—" His jaw tightened. "And what do you say?" "That families come in all shapes, that she's loved, that I chose her, and I'll always choose her." Kyle let those words settle, then asked the one thing he hadn't dared to say yet. "Can I see her again?" Zanea looked up sharply. His voice didn't waver. "I'm not asking for rights. Not today. I'm asking as a man who missed her first smile, her first steps, her first everything." The sincerity in his voice pulled at something she'd worked hard to keep locked away. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Chiari, who shifted gently in her sleep, then back at him. "You can see her," she said, "but not on your schedule, not on your terms, and not if you plan to disappear." "I don't," he said quickly. "You can't unsee her now, Kyle, so don't show up if you're not willing to stay." Their eyes held, And for the first time in years, something shifted between them again. Not attraction this time, not tension, just truth. Raw and quiet. "Okay," he said. "I'll stay." Kyle waited 3 days. Not because he wanted to, but because Zanea asked him to give her time. She needed to talk to Chiari, prepare her, think it through. He respected that. For the first time in a long time, Kyle Maddox didn't try to push. He didn't call, didn't show up uninvited. He simply waited. And when the message came, "You can see her Saturday morning. We'll be at June Park, 10:30. He read it twice before responding with a simple, "Thank you." He arrived early, wore jeans and a plain grey sweater. No suit, no driver, no assistant. He left his phone in the glove box and sat in his car for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, replaying what he might say. He had delivered speeches to thousands, closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, but nothing had ever made his throat feel this tight. He spotted them before they saw him. Zanea sat on a bench near the playground, legs crossed, sipping from a thermos. Chiari stood a few feet away, crouched near a patch of dandelions. Her jacket was too big, her sneakers slightly scuffed. She had 2 pink barrettes holding her curls back from her face. She was perfect. Kyle stepped out of the car slowly, walking with purpose, but not urgency. Zanea looked up the moment his shoes hit the path. She gave a small nod. Chiari was still focused on the flowers. When he reached them, he stopped a few feet away. Zanea stood, her expression unreadable. "She knows someone's coming to meet her," she said. "I didn't tell her everything, just that you're someone special I used to work with. Someone who wants to be her friend." Kyle nodded. Zanea called out gently, "Chiari, baby, come here." The little girl looked up, eyes bright. She skipped over, holding a crumpled flower in her palm. "Look what I found." She beamed. Zanea smiled. "That's beautiful. Hey, this is Mr. KL. Remember I told you about him?" Chiari looked up at him. Her eyes studied his face, with that same quiet intensity he'd seen in the mirror for years. Then, without flinching, she asked, "Are you the man from Mommy's story?" Kyle glanced at Zanea, surprised. Zanea knelt beside her daughter. "Remember, we talked about how Mommy used to work with someone special? This is him." Chiari didn't seem nervous. She tilted her head, still staring. "You don't look like a story," she said. Kyle crouched to her level. "What do I look like?" She narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. "A tall person." He smiled. Zanea gave a soft laugh. Kyle held out his hand slowly. "Nice to meet you, Chiari." She looked at it, then placed her tiny flower into his palm. "No one has that flower yet," she said. He stared at the yellow petals in his hand. "It's for your pocket," she added. Kyle gently tucked it into his chest pocket. "Thank you." Chiari turned back to the playground. "Want to push me on the swing?" He glanced at Zanea, who shrugged. "If you want to, I'd love to," he said. Chiari grabbed his hand without hesitation and pulled him toward the swings. Kyle followed her, a little stunned. Zanea sat back down, eyes following them. She watched as her daughter handed Kyle strict instructions: not too high, no twisting, count to 10, and he obeyed every one like it was law. Kyle stood behind the swing, hands light on the chains, pushing gently. Chiari giggled with every sway, her laugh echoing over the park's breeze. 3 more. She called out. He counted. 1, 2, 3. When he let the swing slow, she hopped off and ran toward the slide. Kyle walked back to the bench, hands in his pockets. "She's a leader," he said, half smiling. Zanea sipped her drink. "She doesn't like surprises. She's confident. She gets that from herself," she replied quietly. Kyle didn't push, but she felt the weight of the moment settle between them. "You handled that well," she added. "I was terrified." She glanced at him. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's everything." Zanea looked away. "I didn't expect her to talk to me like that," he said. "She's curious, but guarded." "Like her mother." Zanea didn't argue. They sat in silence for a few beats. Kyle spoke again. I know this isn't just about showing up on weekends. I'm not asking to jump into anything uninvited, but I want to be in her life, however you allow it. She turned to face him fully. You don't get to allow your way into parenting, Kyle. You either commit or you step back. I want to commit, he said. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm not going to disappear. She studied him. You're not used to being told no. I'm getting used to it. She blinked, then looked back at Chiari. She's going to have questions, she said. I'll answer them. She'll ask why you weren't around. I'll tell her the truth. That I didn't know. That I missed years I'll never get back, and that I want to earn the rest. His voice didn't shake. Zanea believed him. She hated that part of herself, the one that still trusted him, even after all the silence. She stood slowly. We're here every Saturday morning. Kyle nodded. I'll be here. She turned to go, then paused. You can walk us back to the car. He followed without a word. Chiari ran ahead, skipping, singing a tune only she knew. When they reached the curb, she turned and lifted her arms. Up! Kyle hesitated. Zanea raised an eyebrow. She's asking you. Kyle crouched, lifted her gently. She wrapped her arms around his neck like it was second nature. He held her carefully, his arms steady, his heart not so much. Zanea unlocked the car door. He buckled Chiari in without being asked, then stepped back. The sun was higher now, brighter, a little warmer. As the car pulled away, Chiari waved from the back seat. Kyle stood on the curb until they disappeared down the block. Then he looked at the flower in his chest pocket, and for the first time in his life, he felt seen by someone who didn't expect him to be anyone but present. It rained that night, soft, steady drops tapping against the windows of Zanea's apartment as Chiari slept soundly. In the next room, curled up with her stuffed frog and blanket pulled to her chin, Zanea sat in the living room, legs tucked beneath her, a half-filled mug of herbal tea cooling on the side table. The lights were off, except for the warm glow from a standing lamp in the corner. She hadn't expected to feel anything after the park, but she did. She felt unsettled, not in a threatening way. Kyle had done nothing wrong. He'd shown up, listened, played gently, followed instructions. He hadn't overstepped, and still something had shifted. Maybe it was the way Chiari had warmed to him so quickly, or how naturally he'd held her, like his arms had always known her weight. Maybe it was the look on his face when he watched her swing, like time was catching up all at once. Whatever it was, it left Zanea wide awake long after Chiari drifted off. When her phone buzzed at 9:43 p.m., she hesitated. Kyle, she's special. Thank you for letting me be there today. She stared at the message, then replied simply, Zanea, she is, and you handled it well. Seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. Kyle, can I ask you something? Zanea, depends. Kyle, do you hate me? Her thumb hovered. She wasn't expecting that. She took a breath. Zanea, no. Kyle, I think I hated myself for a while, for not knowing. Zanea, you couldn't have known. Kyle, I could have asked more, paid more attention, looked harder. She didn't argue. Kyle, you said I was loud, that I would have ruined your life. Zanea, I said your world was loud. There's a difference. Kyle, I want to know the difference. Can I call you? Zanea stared at the screen. It had been years since she'd heard his voice over the phone. Years since he was anything more than a ghost woven into memory. But tonight, the rain softened something in her. She called him. He picked up after one ring. Neither of them spoke right away. Then his voice, low and careful. Thank you. For what? For not hanging up. I almost did. He gave a soft laugh. Of course you did. A silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just thick with what hadn't been said. How did you feel? He asked, Seeing me again? Zanea let the quiet stretch. Like I couldn't breathe, she said finally. Like time had collapsed, and I was standing in front of every version of myself I'd tried to bury. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, I deserved that. No, she said. It wasn't about blame, it was about memory. Another pause. Did I really say I didn't want kids? He asked quietly. You said you didn't want a family. That was true then. And now? I don't know what I want, he admitted. But I know who I want to know. Zanea closed her eyes. That little girl isn't a question mark, Kyle, she said. She's a person. She needs consistency. She needs someone who sees her, not just when it's convenient. I see her, then keep showing up. That's all I ask. I will. Another silence followed. Then Kyle asked, And you? What do you need? She opened her mouth, then stopped. No one had asked her that in a long time. What did she need? Stability, quiet, sleep, but also maybe someone who didn't look at her like she was fragile. Or like her life was a string of calculated decisions. Maybe someone who didn't see her motherhood as a roadblock or burden. Maybe. I don't know, she said honestly. I haven't let myself need much in a while. I want to earn space to find out, he said. Zanea leaned back into the couch, listening to the rain. Why me? She asked suddenly. He hesitated. In that elevator, he said, I saw someone who didn't want anything from me. Not my attention, not my money, not my name. Most people don't need $1 billion bank account to be enough. I didn't know that then. And now? He was quiet for a long time, then said, Now I wonder how many good things I missed by being afraid of real ones. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. I'm not perfect, he continued. I'm still learning how to stop performing. Still unlearning what I thought strength looked like. Zanea's voice was softer now. Strength isn't in power, Kyle. It's in presence. She heard his breath shift through the line. I want to try, he said. Not to fix anything, just to be present. For her. For you, if you'll let me. You don't need to save me. I'm not trying to, he replied. I just don't want to miss any more firsts. She closed her eyes, let that settle, then quietly said, Then you'll need to be here for the ordinary too. The tantrums, the mess, the quiet mornings with soggy cereal and cartoons on too loud. I'm ready for that. We'll see. She didn't mean it as a challenge, just truth. The clock read 10:23 p.m. She heard a soft shuffle from the hallway, Chiari's sleepy steps. I have to go, she said gently. Kyle seemed to understand. Thank you for picking up. Zanea hung up. She rose and met her daughter halfway. Chiari blinked at her. Mommy, yeah, baby. I had a dream you were laughing. Zanea crouched to her level. Was I happy? Chiari nodded. Then maybe it was more than a dream, she whispered. She scooped her daughter into her arms, carried her back to bed, and for the first time in a long time, her heart didn't feel like it was holding everything alone. 2 weeks after the park, Zanea stood outside a brick building with arched windows and a small front garden, staring at the apartment key in her palm. It wasn't the kind of place she thought she'd ever live in. Too modern, too quiet, too close to the life she once escaped. But Kyle had offered, not demanded, and more importantly, he hadn't offered his penthouse. That mattered. I found a unit 3 blocks from Chiari's preschool, he had said one afternoon. It's quiet, no press, no connections to me or Drexler. You'd have full control of the lease. I'll cover the rent, but it'll be under your name. She'd said no at first, not out of pride, but caution. She'd built her independence from scraps. Taking his help, even with no strings attached, felt like inviting back the imbalance she'd worked so hard to leave behind. But then, she visited the building and saw the way Chiari lit up at the small reading nook in the corner of the living room, and how the preschool was literally a 6-minute walk away. It wasn't about luxury. It was about breathing room, about structure, safety, and yes, stability. So she said yes, with conditions. You're helping because you're her father, she told Kyle. Not because you're fixing anything. This is still my life, my pace. He didn't flinch. That's exactly what I want. And for the first time in months, she believed him. The apartment itself was bright and open. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen with soft grey cabinets, and a large window that let in morning light. Zanea unpacked slowly, 1 box at a time. Kyle didn't hover. He came by the next afternoon, not with questions or suggestions, but with groceries. Bananas, pancake mix, almond milk, crayons. Chiari screamed when she saw the colouring books. "Daddy got this?" she asked, holding it up. Kyle froze at the word. Zanea watched him, unsure how he'd respond. But he crouched down and said, "Only if that's what you want to call me." Chiari nodded once, very seriously. "I do." Kyle smiled. And that was that. No announcement. No grand reveal. Just a small truth accepted between a little girl and the man who missed the first half of her life. That night, after Chiari fell asleep, Kyle stayed a little longer. On the couch, legs crossed, flipping through one of her storybooks. Zanea made tea. They sat quietly in the living room, the soft sound of a dishwasher in the background. "This feels surreal," he said finally. Zanea took a sip. "Which part?" "All of it. Her, you, this apartment. The way she looked at me today, like I've always been here. She gives people her heart until they show her she shouldn't. I don't want to be one of those people." She looked at him over the rim of her mug. "Then don't." Kyle nodded slowly. "I'm not expecting anything from you," she added. "Not a relationship. Not some neatly packaged ending." "I know. But if you stay," she continued, "then be here fully. Messy days, sick days, off days, all of it. I will." A beat passed. "Why did you ask me to move here?" she asked quietly. Kyle looked at her. "Because I wanted Chiari to see me more than twice a month. And because I knew you'd never accept my world. But maybe you'd let me meet you halfway." Zanea leaned back, surprised by his honesty. "I don't want to control your life," he said. "I just want to be allowed inside it." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I can live with that." They fell into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Kyle would come by in the evenings twice a week, sometimes to help with dinner, sometimes to read to Chiari. Sometimes just to sit on the floor and listen to her describe her day in dramatic toddler language. Zanea kept boundaries clear. She didn't ask him to stay. He never tried to overstep. But little by little, trust began to thread between them again. He saw the way she moved in the mornings, organized, efficient, warm without excess. He noticed how she never complained, even on hard days. And she noticed, too, the way he softened around Chiari, the way he asked questions without judgment, the way he looked at her like he was still seeing her for the first time. One evening, Kyle showed up with takeout and 3 sets of plastic chopsticks. "I forgot how much you used to order Thai after late meetings," he said casually. Zanea blinked. "You remembered that?" "I remember more than you think." They ate on the floor that night, Chiari asleep early from preschool exhaustion, and when Kyle rose to leave, he paused by the door. "You're not afraid of me anymore," he said, more observation than question. "I never was," she replied. "I was afraid of losing myself." He nodded once, the weight of that truth settling in his chest. "You didn't," he said, and left. No kiss, no promise, just respect. And that was more intimate than anything they'd had before. It started with leftovers and too much silence. Zanea had made spaghetti. Simple, familiar. Chiari had eaten 3 bites, then fallen asleep during her 3rd rerun of Bluey. Kyle arrived late, still in work clothes, tie loosened, hair ruffled. From rain, something about him looking more human than polished. "You haven't eaten?" he asked, glancing at the untouched plate she was covering with foil. "I forgot to," she said, drying her hands on a towel. I've been trying to fix the form glitch on that contract for hours. Kyle hung his coat by the door. Want help? She smiled faintly. You're not a developer, Kyle. I meant with the dishes. He moved toward the sink, rolled up his sleeves, and turned on the faucet. She watched him from the doorway. The last time she saw him in a kitchen, it was at a corporate retreat 3 years ago. He'd been standing beside a private chef, holding a wineglass and giving orders about some team dinner. He hadn't looked like this. Quiet, focused, unassuming. Now, he was rinsing plates under warm water and humming something under his breath. She couldn't place the tune, but it was soft, calming. After a moment, she joined him. Side by side, they cleaned up in silence. No tension, no performance. Just the easy rhythm of two people who had grown comfortable in a room that used to be filled with space. Later, when she poured tea for herself, she made him a cup too. They sat at opposite ends of the couch. Chiari's small blanket lay crumpled between them. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound for a while. Kyle spoke first. She fell asleep with her shoes on, he said. She does that when she's too tired to admit it. He smiled, but it faded quickly. I missed a lot. Zanea stared into her mug. You did. I won't miss more. She looked up then, slowly, calmly. You're here now, she said. That matters more to her than anything. And to you? Her eyes didn't flinch. It matters. He looked relieved. Not because she said what he hoped, but because she said something at all. Another silence. Then he said, I think about that night sometimes. She felt her breath catch. The elevator, he added. The rooftop. The way you looked at me, like you were waiting for me to disappoint you. I wasn't waiting, she said. I was preparing. He nodded. I didn't expect anything from that night, she continued. I just let it happen. Did you regret it? No. She said it with no hesitation. Kyle leaned back, letting her words sit between them. I've changed, he said softly. I can tell. And you? I became a mother. That changes everything. He nodded. I've also learned to protect my peace, she added. He smiled, but there was something wistful in it. And here I am, knocking on your door again. You haven't knocked yet. He looked at her. Figuratively, she clarified. He chuckled. What would I need to say to make you open it? Zanea turned to face him fully. I don't want a rescue. I don't want promises. I don't need fireworks. I just need to know that when things get quiet again, when life isn't new or surprising, you won't disappear. I won't. She searched his face. Kyle set his mug down. Can I stay a little longer? She nodded. Neither of them moved closer. Not at first. But the conversation softened. Stories from college. Childhood mischief. Kyle confessed that he never learned to ride a bike until he was 10. Zanea laughed, surprised. They talked about Chiari, how she hated tags in her clothes, how she'd recently become obsessed with counting everything, how she refused to eat carrots unless they were cut into circles. I don't want to be a visitor in her life, he said. Then don't act like one, she replied. Their eyes met again. This time, something unspoken lingered. A moment later, she stood. Let me get you a blanket, she said, voice steady. He watched her walk down the hall. When she returned, she handed him a folded quilt. Kyle reached for it, but didn't pull it away right away. His hand brushed hers. Zanea didn't move. Their eyes locked. A quiet pause. Then she sat beside him. He didn't lean in. She didn't look away. They just sat, close enough to feel the heat between them, far enough to pretend it wasn't there. Until Kyle said, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd followed you that morning? She swallowed. I don't. Why not? Because then we wouldn't be who we are now. He nodded slowly. And who are we now? Zanea took a long breath. We're people who've made mistakes, who've grown, who are trying again, not as the versions we used to be, but as the people we've become. Kyle studied her, then whispered, I like this version of us. So do I. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch again. But when she handed him a pillow, and he settled onto the couch, and she turned out the light, something unspoken stayed in the room between them. Not romance. Not resolution. Something softer. Hope. Morning crept in quietly. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting soft lines on the hardwood floor. Chiari stirred first, climbing down from her toddler bed, her curls flattened on one side. Still half asleep, she padded into the living room, dragging her stuffed frog by one leg. She stopped when she saw Kyle on the couch. He was turned slightly, one arm over his head, breathing slow and deep. The blanket she'd seen before bed now rested just under his chin. Chiari tilted her head, then whispered, "Mummy?" Zanea appeared from the hallway in her robe, coffee in hand. "He's sleeping, baby," she said softly. Chiari looked up. "Why?" "Because he stayed over." Chiari thought for a second. "Like a sleepover?" Zanea smiled faintly. "Kind of." The little girl tiptoed to the couch and placed her frog beside Kyle's hand. Then, without warning, she tapped his forehead with her finger. "Wake up." Kyle opened his eyes slowly, blinking into the light. The first thing he saw was Chiari's face, just inches from his. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied, voice raspy. "Did I miss breakfast?" She giggled. "We didn't make it yet." Kyle sat up, stretching. "Can we have pancakes?" Chiari asked. He looked toward the kitchen. "Only if I can help." Zanea raised an eyebrow from the corner. "You know how to make pancakes?" "No, but I follow instructions." Well, that morning unfolded without effort. Chiari stood on her stool, pouring too much milk into the batter. Kyle stirred carefully, eyes narrowed as if he were negotiating $1 million deal. Zanea stood back, letting them figure it out. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and syrup. They ate together at the small dining table, Chiari chattering between bites, Kyle listening like he'd never heard anything more important. After breakfast, they built a tower of blocks on the rug, then knocked it down, then built it again. Zanea watched, quiet. Something in her chest shifted. Not fear, not resistance, just the slow, inevitable realization that this was what a beginning looked like. Not declarations, not timelines, just presence. Later that week, Kyle showed up again, this time with a backpack over his shoulder and a folder full of coloring pages. "Surprise for Chiari," he said. Inside were printouts of every animal she loved. Penguins, elephants, foxes. "She's going through a zoo phase," Zanea noted. "I did some research," he said proudly. Chiari squealed when she saw the pages and launched into a full recap of the last book she read at school. Kyle listened to every word, nodding like each sentence mattered. By the third visit that week, Kyle knew her bedtime routine by heart. Brush teeth. 3 songs. 1 story. 2 kisses. Forehead and cheek. No exceptions. He learned that she hated itchy socks, refused apple slices if they touched crackers on the plate, and insisted on announcing every time she went to the bathroom, just in case someone missed it. And he loved all of it. One evening, after Chiari was tucked in, Kyle stayed behind again. He didn't ask. Zanea didn't send him away. They shared tea, talked about their days. She told him about a freelance contract she was considering. He told her about stepping back from the Drexler board for a month. "Just to breathe," he said. It became a pattern, not quite routine, but close. He never brought up the past. She never asked what they were. And yet, something was forming. It wasn't built on seduction or regret. It was built on the way he wiped syrup off Chiari's chin without blinking, the way he folded laundry badly but still tried, the way he asked, "How was your day?" and meant it. One night, as he packed up to leave, Chiari ran up with a crayon drawing. "It's us," she said proudly. "You, me, Mummy." Kyle knelt, taking the paper with both hands. The figures were simple, 3 people, all smiling, with hearts floating over their heads. He swallowed. "Can I keep this?" he asked. Chiari nodded. "Put it on your wall." He smiled. "I will." That night, he hung it on the wall next to his kitchen table. It was crooked, the tape peeled on one side by morning, but he didn't fix it. He liked the imperfection, because it reminded him of something real, something he was slowly, carefully becoming part of. It started with a knock at the door and a bag of groceries that had clearly been packed by someone who didn't read labels. Zanea opened the door to find Kyle standing there, holding 2 paper bags with a sheepish smile. "I tried to pick up ingredients for dinner," he said. "But I think I confused parsley with cilantro. And I may have bought almond butter instead of peanut butter." She looked at him, then at the bags. "Is that 3 cartons of eggs?" They were on sale. Zanea stepped aside, motioning him in. "I'll be the first to admit," he said, placing the bags on the kitchen counter. "I have never cooked anything that didn't involve a microwave or boiling water. Good thing you brought too many eggs. We'll have room for trial and error." Kyle rolled up his sleeves like a man preparing for battle. "What are we making?" he asked. "Fried rice. Sounds easy enough." "It's not." She handed him a cutting board and a bell pepper. "You get to chop." He stared at it like it had offended him. "I run 3 companies, and you trust me with a knife?" "You're under supervision," she said, grinning. Chiari, sitting at the table with a bowl of grapes, looked up and declared, "Daddy can't cook. Mummy's the chef." Kyle gave a mock gasp. "Traitor," she giggled. While Zanea sautéed vegetables, Kyle told a story about his first week living alone after college, how he'd burned pasta, ruined a coffee maker, and mistook powdered sugar for flour. Zanea laughed, genuinely, fully, for the first time in a long while. Kyle paused when he heard it. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "Just, you laughed." "I do that sometimes. Not like that." She gave a small shrug, flipping the rice in the pan. Kyle leaned against the counter, watching her. "You used to carry the weight of the world in your shoulders," he said. "No," he replied. "You share it now. A little." That made her go quiet, but not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. After dinner, while Kyle washed the dishes and Chiari practiced somersaults, on the living room carpet, Zanea sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her. She watched them. It felt surreal and simple at once. Later, when Chiari was asleep, Kyle lingered. Again. The apartment was dim. Rain tapped at the windows. A familiar quiet wrapped around them. Zanea handed him a blanket like she always did, but he didn't take the couch right away. Instead, he sat beside her. Close. Not too close, but close enough. They didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "Today felt normal." Kyle turned toward her slightly. "Good normal or boring normal?" "Safe normal." He let that sit. Then said, "I like that." She looked down at her hands. "I never thought we'd have anything like this," she admitted. "Me neither." She turned her head toward him. Kyle didn't move. He just looked at her, really looked, like he had in that elevator 3 years ago. The moment sat heavy between them. Not rushed, not forced, just waiting. Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. "What are we to you now?" She exhaled, slow. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm not afraid to find out anymore." He nodded once, and that was enough. He didn't kiss her, didn't reach for her hand. He simply stayed beside her, shoulder to shoulder, in the quiet safety of something new. Eventually, she stood and handed him the blanket. He smiled. "See you in the morning?" "Only if you're making breakfast. I'll try not to burn the toast." She laughed again, softer this time, but still real. Kyle watched her walk away, and this time he felt it in his chest. Not guilt, not need, but something warmer. Hope, maybe. The slow understanding that sometimes second chances don't arrive with apologies or roses. Sometimes they show up with too many eggs, bad knife skills, and the sound of someone laughing like they haven't in years. If you've ever felt like laughter had left your life, and then one quiet moment brought it back, this chapter was for you. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's soft, shared over dinner, in a messy kitchen, or in the silence between two people learning to trust again. Do you believe second chances can feel this natural? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Share your favorite moment. Tell us, have you ever laughed your way back to someone's heart? And if this story speaks to you, go ahead and tap that like button. Share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. This love? It's just getting started. It was a slow morning in Milwaukee. Rain tapped gently on the kitchen window, and Chiari sat cross-legged on the living room rug, surrounded by crayons and stickers. Kyle was flipping pancakes, poorly, but with a kind of clumsy charm that made Xenia laugh. "Yours look like clouds," she teased, watching the misshapen pile on the plate. "Clouds taste better than circles." "That's science," he replied, sliding one onto Chiari's plastic plate. Xenia sipped her tea, feeling the stillness. These moments were rare. Soft, real. A man who once ruled skyscrapers now wore socks with cartoon bananas, and carried a 3-year-old on his shoulders at the farmer's market. He'd been staying the weekends, then weekdays, then longer. Not officially moved in, but not gone either. They hadn't labeled it, but something was building. Steady, quiet, sure. Until the vibration of Kyle's phone broke it all. He glanced at it once, brow furrowing. Then again, his smile faded. "I need to take this." Xenia nodded, brushing toast crumbs off her robe. She watched him step into the hallway and shut the door behind him. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When he returned, his face was tight. "Everything okay?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her like he was already forming damage control in his head. "There's a situation." Her stomach dropped. "What kind?" Kyle exhaled sharply and turned the phone toward her. A headline blazed across a tabloid site. "Drexler CEO's secret family. Mysterious woman and toddler spotted with billionaire in Milwaukee." Below it, grainy photos. One showed Kyle walking with Xenia and Chiari in the park. Another, zoomed in, caught Chiari on his shoulders, laughing. Xenia's chest tightened. "How?" "I don't know," he muttered. "But someone followed us." She stepped back. "Did you tell anyone?" "No. Never. I was careful." She looked at the screen again. The photos weren't flattering. They weren't respectful. They felt invasive, stolen pieces of something sacred. "This wasn't supposed to get out," she whispered. Kyle's voice was low. "I'll handle it." "How?" she asked, already feeling the walls closing in. "I'll call PR. Legal. Get it taken down." Xenia turned away, arms crossed over her chest. "It's already out, Kyle." Chiari looked up from the floor, blinking innocently. "Mummy." Xenia smiled tightly. "Finish your pancakes, baby." Kyle moved toward her once Chiari was distracted again. "Listen to me. We don't have to say anything. We don't owe them a story." "But they just took ours," she said, voice cracking. Kyle paused. "Do you regret this?" The question stunned her. "Not her," she said immediately. "Never her. But being seen like this, without my choice, without warning, that terrifies me." He nodded slowly. "I get it. I don't think you do," she said, backing away. "You're used to cameras. I'm not. I can't have reporters showing up at her daycare. I won't let her become gossip." "You think I would?" "I think this is your world, Kyle, and I don't know if I fit in it." Kyle's eyes burned. "You already do." But she wasn't convinced. Not right now, because all she could see was her face, blurred and half-lit, plastered beneath a headline she didn't write. And all she could think was, how do you protect a child from a world that devours stories for breakfast? Later that evening, Kyle paced the kitchen, phone glued to his ear, his voice clipped and cold. "I don't care who leaked it. Find them. Get it scrubbed. I want names, and I want it off every platform. Zanea sat on the couch, Chiari curled into her lap. Her daughter was asleep, but her little fingers still clung to her shirt. It made Zanea ache. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had, the life she chose to protect. When Kyle hung up, he walked over slowly. "They're trying to trace the source," he said. "But the pictures are already out there. I'm sorry." "I know," she murmured. Silence stretched between them. He sat beside her, head in his hands. "I thought we had more time," he whispered. "So did I." Zanea looked at him. Truly looked. Not the CEO, not the man in articles or interviews. Just a father, a man in love, scared. And that's when she realized this wasn't just her secret anymore. It was theirs. And maybe, just maybe, that meant they'd face it together. Even if the world came knocking, by the next morning, it wasn't just a headline. It was everywhere. Social media spun stories faster than they could breathe. TikToks analyzing Kyle's mystery daughter. Twitter threads debating if the child was his. Gossip blogs recycling the same images with different spins. Billionaire's secret family. Is he still with his ex? From boardrooms to baby bottles, Kyle Drexler's scandal inside the life of the woman who hid the CEO's child. Zanea hadn't left the house. Chiari didn't understand what was happening, but she sensed something. Her usually joyful chatter turned quiet. Her grip on her mother's hand tighter. Kyle sat by the window, reading through the endless noise, jaw clenched. "I've never seen them this fast," he muttered. One article turned into a media storm in 12 hours. Zanea closed the laptop. "Stop reading it. I have to know what I'm dealing with." "No, you don't," she snapped. "You're not dealing with it. We are." Kyle looked at her, guilt softening his face. "You're right." But apologies didn't change the fact that a camera had stolen their privacy, or that strangers now debated Chiari's existence like it was public property. And worse, Zanea's inbox was full, not with support, but cruelty, judgment, threats, gold digger. She trapped him. She wanted this. She knew what she was doing. She turned her phone off and left it on the counter. Kyle noticed. What did they say? Nothing true. He walked toward her slowly. "Zanea, I'm fine." But her hands trembled as she washed a cup. Her breath caught in her throat when the doorbell rang. She flinched when Kyle's phone vibrated again, and she hated that she felt watched, even in her own home. "I've arranged for a security car to sit out front," he said gently, "just for a few days. Until things quiet down." She didn't fight him on it, not this time. Instead, she looked out the window, past the neighbors' yards and kids on bikes, and whispered, "I wanted to raise her quietly. No attention, no noise. I just wanted her to be safe." "She is," Kyle said firmly. For now, she finally turned to face him. "But what about next time? What if they follow us to the grocery store? What if she grows up thinking the world is always staring at her?" Kyle's face fell. "I never meant for this to touch her." "But it has," she whispered. He stepped closer. "I'll protect you both. Whatever it takes." Zanea didn't move. "I don't need a guard. I need a man who understands that silence isn't weakness. It's safety. That some of us were taught not to shout, but to survive." Kyle nodded. "Then teach me." That stopped her. Not defend, not dismiss, but learn. Still, her trust was fragile. "We'll see," she murmured. The first real fallout came not from the press, but from Kyle's board. He flew to Chicago for an emergency meeting, one he hadn't planned to tell her about until she caught sight of his packed bag. "You're going back?" she asked, arms folded. "Just overnight. They called an emergency session. And let me guess, they want answers." Kyle hesitated. "Some of them are nervous. Investors don't like surprises." "Neither do mothers." He winced. "Zanea." "I get it," she said, voice flat. "Go clean your mess. It's our family." No, she corrected. Chiari is mine. You're still figuring out how to show up. That cut deeper than she knew. Kyle didn't argue. He just nodded, kissed Chiari's forehead, and left. Chicago felt colder than usual. The boardroom buzzed with tension as Kyle entered. His CFO, Marcel, stood first. You should have told us, Marcel said. I wasn't obligated to. No. But we're now scrambling to manage a PR crisis. Kyle stood tall. There is no crisis. There's a child. My child. Murmurs rippled. An older woman at the far end, Susan, head of investor relations, leaned forward. Kyle, you built this company on discipline, discretion, and control. The press is framing this as a scandal. That hurts the brand. My daughter isn't a scandal, Kyle snapped, and I won't apologize for her. Another board member chimed in. This woman, Zania. Is she coming forward? Are you getting ahead of the story? No. She values her privacy. As do I. That's not enough, Marcel said. We need a narrative. Something reassuring. Kyle's eyes hardened. Then here's the narrative. I'm a father. I've taken responsibility. I remain committed to this company, and my personal life is not a liability unless you choose to make it one. Silence. Susan adjusted her glasses. Fine. But you'll need to make an official statement. Keep it brief, respectful, and clean. Kyle nodded. I'll write it tonight. And Kyle? Marcel added. You should consider what this means long term. If she's in your life, she's in ours. Be sure. Kyle didn't answer. He was already sure. Back in Milwaukee, Zania watched the press conference from her couch. It was short, professional. The backdrop read, Drexler Innovations. Kyle stood alone, in a charcoal suit, no tie. He looked into the camera and said, I recently became aware of my daughter's existence. Her mother, a private citizen, has shown strength, grace, and dignity throughout this transition. While I value my family's privacy, I want to make clear, I am proud to be a father. My priority is protecting my daughter and supporting her mother, now and always. Zania felt her chest ache. He hadn't said her name. He hadn't used soft words or performative smiles. But somehow, it landed, not just as a statement, but as a line drawn in the sand. One that said, this is mine. You don't get to twist it. Chiari climbed into her lap, holding a toy doll. Mummy, he's on the TV. Yes, she said, pulling her daughter close. He is. Is he coming home? Zania kissed the top of her head. He said he would, and this time, she almost believed him. Kyle returned on a rainy Thursday. No press, no camera crew, no chauffeur, just him, soaked to the shoulders, a duffel bag in hand, and a look that said he wasn't here for a visit. Zania opened the door with Chiari in her arms. Kyle froze. His daughter was wearing a hoodie with cartoon planets on it and holding a juice box like it was treasure. Her curls had grown longer, fuller. He'd missed 2 nights, but with children, 2 nights felt like 2 months. Chiari blinked at him, then smiled. You came back. His voice cracked. Always. Zania didn't speak. She stepped aside and let him in. Dinner was quiet. Tension sat between the clinking forks and passing plates. Zania had cooked chicken, rice, and sautéed greens. Nothing fancy, nothing performative. Just enough to fill. Kyle ate slowly, never breaking eye contact with his daughter, who narrated her entire day between mouthfuls. And Miss Rhonda said my son drawing was the biggest. Oh yeah? Kyle said gently. You've always had a bright eye. Zania glanced up. Her fork paused mid-air. Kyle smiled at Chiari. I used to draw space when I was your age too. The rings around Saturn were my favorite. Chiari gasped. Mine too. Their connection was natural, easy. And it made Zania's stomach twist, because it didn't take much. A shared interest, a familiar smile, a calm tone. That was all it took for her daughter to start trusting someone who hadn't been there. After dinner, Zanea tucked Chiari in while Kyle lingered in the hallway. He didn't intrude. He waited. She sang softly, ran her fingers through Chiari's curls, then kissed her forehead. When she stepped out, Kyle was still there. "You want to stay in the guest room again?" she asked, arms folded. "I'd like to stay in the house." She raised a brow. "You think this is permanent?" "I think I want to try." She walked past him, toward the living room. "Try" is a word you used before, right before leaving. Kyle followed. "I know. That's why I'm not using it lightly." Zanea sat on the edge of the couch. "So, what is this? An apology tour?" "No. No rehearsed speeches this time. Just reality." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "Reality is a child who asked every night if you were still coming back. Reality is a mother who stopped checking her phone because it hurt more to hope. Reality is not soft, Kyle. It's jagged." He sat across from her, quiet. "I'm not trying to smooth over the jagged parts," he said. "I want to sit with them." Zanea let out a tired breath. "And then what?" "Then I learn. And you lead. Because clearly, you've been doing it alone long enough." She didn't reply, but she didn't push him away either. That night, Kyle stayed in the guest room. The house was smaller than he remembered. Not in size, but in detail. Everything in it had meaning. Framed drawings. A sticky note on the fridge with a grocery list. A paper schedule on the wall with Chiari's name written in block letters. These were the things he had missed, the intimacy of routine. He walked quietly, careful not to disturb the silence. He noticed the baby monitor still set up in Chiari's room, though she was old enough to sleep without it. When he reached for a glass of water, he found a crayon floating inside. He laughed quietly. Real life. No polish. No boardroom shine. And it was exactly what he wanted. The next morning, Kyle offered to do school drop-off. Zanea hesitated. "She's used to my rhythm," she said. "We walk. We talk. Let me join." That surprised her. "You sure?" "Walking with you two sounds like the best start to my day." They walked the 3 blocks to Chiari's preschool in the crisp air, passing neighbors who offered cautious smiles. Some recognized Kyle. Others whispered once they passed. Zanea kept her chin high. Kyle stayed close. At the gate, Chiari kissed her mom, then turned to her father. Kyle knelt. "Want a high five?" She gave him a hug instead. He didn't move for a full second. Then his arms wrapped around her gently, like a man holding something sacred. When she skipped away, Kyle stood. "You did that," he said softly. "You raised a girl who hugs without fear." Zanea glanced at him. "Don't say it like you had nothing to do with it. She has your calm." He looked stunned and grateful. Back at the house, the silence wasn't awkward. It was companionable. Kyle brewed coffee while she packed Chiari's laundry. He folded clothes with her, despite messing up the t-shirts. He didn't talk much, just listened, watched. When she dropped a sock and bent to grab it, he said quietly, "Do you regret it?" She stood slowly. "What?" Having her alone. Zanea didn't answer right away. She looked toward the photo wall. "I regret nothing that gave me Chiari," she said, "but I regret thinking I had to do it alone." Kyle's throat tightened. "I want to change that." She turned. "It's not about what you want anymore. It's about what you do, and whether that earns you space. I'll show up, until the space feels earned." She nodded. "Then start by picking her up this afternoon." And just like that, the door creaked open. Not wide, but enough for Hope to step in. Kyle was early. He stood across the street from the preschool 15 minutes before the bell. A hoodie covered his head, not for warmth, but for privacy. A billionaire waiting at a school gate wasn't typical in their neighborhood. And the last thing he wanted was to make Chiari uncomfortable. He leaned on a street lamp and watched other parents show up. Some looked rushed, others tired. but every face softened when they saw their child walk out. That part was universal. Then he saw her. Chiari walked hand in hand with her teacher, wearing a pink paper crown and a big smile. Kyle stepped forward. When she spotted him, she froze, then broke into a sprint. "Daddy!" The word hit him like wind in the chest. Kyle caught her and swung her up. "Someone had a good day," he said. "I got the kindness crown," she said proudly. "Only one kid gets it a day. It's for sharing." Kyle swallowed. "That's my girl." They walked home together. Chiari told stories with animated arms, while Kyle listened, nodding, asking questions. A few neighbors looked on curiously. The CEO who once ruled headlines now holding a preschooler's backpack. When they reached the house, Zanea was on the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "How'd it go?" she asked. "She's an award winner," Kyle said. "Crown and all." Chiari beamed. Zanea raised a brow. "Did you eat the cookie I packed?" Chiari looked sheepish. "I gave half to Layla. She didn't have one." Zanea kissed her forehead. "That's okay, baby. That's love." Later that evening, they watched a movie together. Zanea let Chiari pick, something animated with talking animals and a silly villain. Kyle didn't know half the characters, but he laughed when Chiari laughed. Zanea sat on the other side of the couch, arms crossed, but her shoulders were a little looser now. When Chiari dozed off halfway through, Kyle carried her to bed. Zanea watched him. His movements weren't stiff. He wasn't acting like a guest. He carried their daughter like someone who had done this before. In dreams, maybe, but still with care. When he came back into the living room, she was waiting. "You're settling in." "I don't want to be a visitor," he said. "Not here. Not in her life." She nodded, slowly. "Then don't mess it up." That night, it rained again. Kyle sat at the kitchen island with a cup of tea. Zanea walked in, barefoot, arms wrapped around herself. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too many thoughts?" "Same." She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Silence hung between them. Not cold, just real. "You used to talk in your sleep," she said softly. Kyle chuckled. "Don't tell me I still do. Not anymore. But back then, it was always about business." He smiled faintly. "Figures. But one night," she continued, "you said my name. Just my name, clear as day. And you smiled." His breath caught. "I didn't tell you," she said. "I was scared it would mean something." "It does," he said quietly. "It still does." Zanea looked away. "I didn't just love you, Z," he said. "I feared how much I did, and instead of facing that fear, I buried myself in what I could control. The company, the headlines, the investments, everything but you." She folded her arms. "I don't need a speech. I'm not giving one. I'm admitting something. I thought being great meant never bending. But you," he stepped closer, "you broke and built things better. I want to learn from that." Zanea stared at him. Her jaw worked slightly, trying to hold something in. Then she turned and walked past him. But before she left the room, she said over her shoulder, "Sleep on the couch tonight." It wasn't cold. It wasn't rejection. It was trust in progress. The next morning, Kyle woke up to the smell of cinnamon. Zanea had made French toast. Chiari was already at the table, laughing about something on her tablet. Kyle walked in, shirt wrinkled, eyes heavy. "Morning," Zanea said, handing him a mug. He blinked. "You made this?" "Don't get excited. You're still on dish duty." He smiled. "Fair." They ate breakfast like a family. For the first time, the house didn't feel like it had lines drawn. It felt whole. That afternoon, Kyle returned from a quick grocery run. When he stepped into the house, he heard music, soft, old-school soul, and laughter. Zanea and Chiari were dancing in the living room, spinning slowly, matching steps, He stood at the door for a while, watching. Zanea caught his eye, held it. Then, without a word, she extended her hand. Kyle set the groceries down and joined them. 3 bodies, 1 rhythm. 1 home. And for the first time since the headlines, since the silence, since the pain, Zanea softened. She let her guard down, if only for a song. But for Kyle, it was enough, because now he had something worth dancing for. The invitation came from the mayor's office. Founders Circle Charity Gala, the cream card read in embossed gold, honoring innovation, leadership, and legacy. Zanea turned the envelope over twice before placing it on the kitchen table. She didn't need to ask who forwarded the invite. It had Kyle written all over it, not in ink, but in intention. When he walked in from Chiari's dance rehearsal, sweaty but smiling, she raised an eyebrow. "This came for me." Kyle looked at the card. "Yeah, I submitted your name for the Community Entrepreneur Honor. They said yes." She exhaled slowly. "You didn't ask me first. I wanted it to be a surprise." "It is too much?" She didn't answer. She just handed it back and walked to the sink. Kyle followed. "Z, come on. You've been running this non-profit for 4 years. You've gotten 0 recognition outside this zip code. You deserve this." She turned, hand on hip. "Recognition isn't why I built Haven House. I built it because I didn't want another mom sleeping in her car with her child." Kyle softened. "And that's exactly why you deserve the spotlight. People should know your name." She watched him for a moment. "This event, it's full of cameras, the same people who dragged my name through the press. Not this time. You're not standing in my shadow. You're walking in with your own light." Her jaw worked. "And you?" He took a breath. "If you'll have me, I'd like to walk beside you." The night of the gala shimmered with soft light and murmurs of money. Kyle wore a sharp black suit, every detail tailored, but his eyes stayed fixed on one thing: Zanea. She stepped out of their ride in a deep emerald gown that hugged her figure without screaming for attention. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, revealing gold hoop earrings and an unbothered expression. But Kyle saw it, the tiny tremor in her hand, the way her shoulders stayed high. He offered his arm. She paused, then looped hers through his. Inside, the room glittered with Atlanta's elite: CEOs, founders, city council members, celebrities who gave to look good. When Zanea walked in, some heads turned in confusion. Others, in realization. Isn't she the one Kyle went silent about? But she didn't flinch. When someone whispered, she smiled brighter. When someone glanced too long, she raised her chin. Kyle couldn't look away. This was the woman who birthed his daughter. The woman who built a home from scraps. The woman who, when the world closed in, never let it close her heart. They reached the banquet table. Kyle pulled out her chair, and she sat. Across from them sat Daria Banks, media executive, known shark, and Kyle's former PR lead. The same woman who crafted the Kyle Rivera's statement on personal loss press release 3 years ago. Daria raised her glass. "Long time, Rivera. And this must be the mysterious Zanea I heard so little about." Zanea gave a slow, practiced smile. "Only to those who never asked." Daria chuckled. "Fair." Kyle cleared his throat. "We're here for the work. Let's focus on that." "Oh, of course," Daria said, "though work does get so personal." Zanea placed her napkin in her lap, ignoring the shade, but Kyle's jaw flexed. He reached under the table, brushing his thumb against Zanea's hand. She didn't pull away. An hour later, the awards began. When the host called her name, Zanea froze for a heartbeat. Kyle stood first, clapping. The room followed. Zanea stood, smoothing her gown. She walked up the steps with quiet grace and took the mic. "I didn't plan to speak," she said, "but when you serve the underserved, you get used to improvising." A few chuckles, a few nods. She continued, I started Haven House when I had nothing but a cot, a kettle, and a child who needed safety. Some women build empires, some build shelters. I did both. A pause. And for years, I did it in silence. Because sometimes the noise outside, headlines, rumors, whispers, can drown your own voice. Her eyes flicked to Kyle, but then I remembered. Silence is a choice, and I stopped choosing it. Applause. She ended with a quiet thank you and walked back down to her seat, shoulders lighter. Kyle looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She didn't need a rescue. She was the rescue. The photographer wanted photos. They posed near the step and repeat banner. Zanea stood tall, award in hand, one arm around Kyle. Then the flash went off. Too fast, too close. She blinked. Kyle blinked. The photographer froze, then looked down at his phone. Oh no. What's wrong? Kyle asked. Another flash. This one accidental. The man stammered. There's a headline going viral. He turned the screen. Rivera's backdoor deal? Gala guest honored by foundation, he secretly funds a second photo. Below, Kyle in a boardroom, and behind him, the Haven House logo. Another photo. Zanea and Chiari in a park, grainy and zoomed. Her heart sank. Kyle's face drained. Zanea stepped back. What is that? I don't know. I swear. You never told me you funded the board behind Haven House, she said. I did it anonymously, Kyle said quickly, so you could get grants. Respect. You told me it was grassroots. It was. I just helped keep the lights on sometimes. Zanea turned, cameras still flashing. Why now, Kyle? I didn't leak this, I swear to you. But her walls were already up. Again, and this time, it wasn't the world ruining their peace. It was something he meant as good, but kept hidden. Kyle sat on the park bench just outside Haven House. It was early, barely sunrise, but the city was already humming. Not loud, just enough to remind you it was alive. The same way he now felt, alive, but uncertain. He glanced at his watch, not expecting her yet. But there she was. Zanea walked through the gates with Chiari beside her, the little girl carrying a juice box and her favorite purple hoodie. They didn't see him at first. She bent down to fix Chiari's shoe strap, smiled at something her daughter said. Kyle stood, not to approach, just to acknowledge. Zanea noticed. Her steps slowed. Her eyes held his. No walls this time, just waiting. She nodded once. He took that as his chance. They walked together, not saying much, toward the garden behind the center. It was Chiari's favorite spot, filled with wildflowers and stones painted by the kids. She skipped ahead, singing something from her tablet. Zanea broke the silence first. She likes it here. Says the flowers talk to her. Kyle chuckled softly. She always had a strong imagination. No, Zanea said gently. She just sees what most people miss. They sat on a low stone bench, their knees barely touching. Kyle glanced at her. Thank you, he said. For what? For not dragging my name through the mud. You had every reason. Zanea shrugged. What would have been the point? Wounds don't heal better just because more people see them bleed. Kyle swallowed. She wasn't being poetic. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. What's this? Something overdue. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, a notarized agreement relinquishing Kyle's voting rights, board influence, and monetary oversight at Haven House. Everything he once secretly held through shadow donations. Zanea blinked. You didn't have to. I did, he said. You said you'd rather stand than be carried. So I'm stepping aside completely. You don't owe me a story. You don't owe me a seat at your table. She stared at the paper. It wasn't a gift. It was an apology in ink. Kyle turned to her. I'm not asking for us back. I know it's too soon, but I'm here. Not as a billionaire, not as a problem to fix, just as Chiari's father. And someone who finally understands the weight of silence. Zanea looked at him for a long time, then toward their daughter, who was now crouched by a flower bed, trying to teach a caterpillar how to stay on the path. A soft smile tugged at her lips. "I never needed you to be loud, Kyle," she said quietly. "I needed you to be clear." He nodded. "I'm learning." The following weekend, Kyle joined them at a community cleanup event. No press. No cameras. Just gloves and trash bags. He bent beside a teen scraping old gum off a sidewalk and joked like he wasn't once on Forbes's front cover. He stayed until the last wrapper was bagged and the last cone was stored. Later, as Chiari napped on a blanket and volunteers packed up, Zanea offered him a bottle of water. He accepted it with a quiet thanks. She sat beside him, arms resting on her knees. "Do you know what she told me yesterday?" she asked. Kyle shook his head. She said, "Daddy looks happier now, like he's breathing better." Kyle's throat tightened. He looked at his daughter's sleeping face, then at the woman who gave her everything. "She's not wrong," he said. A few weeks passed. No grand declarations, no forced reunions, just small steps. Kyle started helping with logistics behind the scenes, only when invited. He'd pick up Chiari from school sometimes, always texting first, always asking permission. Zanea didn't rebuild trust out of nostalgia. She rebuilt it out of necessity, for herself, for her daughter, for the life she was shaping on her own terms. Still, the nights grew less heavy. Her smile returned, not because of Kyle, but because of peace, the kind she hadn't known in years. One evening, while Chiari was at a sleepover, Kyle showed up at Haven House with a bag of takeout and 2 forks. Zanea raised a brow. "Peace offering?" He chuckled. "No, just dinner. Thought maybe we could talk, or not talk." She looked at the bag, then at him, then stepped aside. They ate in the back office, side by side on the worn couch, sharing noodles and silence, and the occasional inside joke about their daughter's obsession with glitter. At one point, Zanea turned to him. "You're different," she said. Kyle nodded. "So are you." They didn't kiss, they didn't touch, but they didn't need to. That night, presence was enough. Later that week, at a small donor dinner hosted by Haven House, Maya made a surprise announcement. "We're proud to say Haven House is expanding to a second location, one fully, funded by grants, community support, and 0 private ownership interference." The crowd clapped. Zanea stood beside her, smiling. Kyle watched from the back, his hands in his pockets. He didn't wave, didn't stand. He just watched, proud, grateful. Still, Zanea caught his eye. This time, her smile reached all the way. 6 months later, the city skyline outside Kyle's new penthouse had softened, not in structure, but in meaning. He'd moved from the glass fortress uptown to a place with less marble and more wood, fewer assistants and more plants. It was the first home he'd decorated himself, not a designer's version of success. Just peace. He didn't fill it with noise. He filled it with intention. And tonight, he had one. Zanea stood in the elevator, Chiari holding her hand, bouncing in place. "You think it'll be fancy?" she whispered. Zanea smirked. "It's your dad. There will be napkins." Chiari giggled. When the elevator opened, they were greeted by soft jazz, the smell of roasted vegetables, and a living room lined with framed drawings, all by Chiari. Zanea blinked. Is that her crayon version of Haven House? Kyle stepped out of the kitchen in jeans and a navy sweater, wiping his hands. "Framed masterpieces," he said. "Limited edition." Chiari squealed and ran into his arms. Zanea stepped in, slowly. No walls, no hesitation, just heart. Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, salad, and cornbread, the way Zanea's mother used to make it. Kyle didn't try to impress. He listened. He laughed at Chiari's stories about a squirrel at school that stared too hard. He poured juice without spilling. He cleared plates. And when Chiari asked if she could sleep over, Zanea didn't flinch. "She has school tomorrow." "I'll drive her," Kyle said instantly. "My meeting's not till noon." Zanea studied him, not out of suspicion, but because he made it easy now to trust, to lean in, to see not the man he had been, but the one he'd become. That night, after Chiari went to bed in the guest room with her lavender nightlight and favorite stuffed panda, Kyle returned to the couch with 2 mugs of tea. Zanea sat beside him, barefoot now, her hair down. He handed her a cup. She took it. "I didn't know you remembered this blend." He smiled. "Your mom gave me a whole lecture about steeping times the first time I visited." "It stuck," Zanea chuckled. There was a long pause. Then Kyle turned, serious. "Do you think we could try again? Not out of habit, not for Chiari, but because it's different now. I'm different." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the tea, then at him. "I never stopped loving you," she said, "even when I wanted to. But I also learned how to love myself again, and I won't lose that. You won't have to. And I need more than promises. You'll have presence, silence." Then her fingers reached for his, held them. "Then, let's begin." Weeks passed. They moved, slowly. No grand announcements. Just daily choices. He'd pick up groceries. She'd swing by his place after work. Chiari would bounce between 2 homes that never made her feel torn. It was love, grown, not forced. One morning, Kyle surprised them with a picnic in the park. Chiari raced ahead while he and Zanea walked hand in hand. "I used to think love had to be loud," he said. "Like grand gestures and red carpets." Zanea smiled. "Turns out, it's folding laundry and making tea, and showing up," he added. She leaned into him. "Exactly." That fall, Kyle sat in the front row of Haven House's annual fundraiser, not as a donor or silent partner, but as a volunteer. Zanea stood at the podium, powerful, graceful, her voice clear. "We stand here today because we chose not to give up. Not on each other, not on the mission, and not on ourselves." The crowd erupted in applause. She glanced at Kyle. He didn't mouth anything. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. Later, at home, Chiari curled up between them on the couch, half asleep, her panda tucked under her arm. Kyle wrapped an arm around them both. Zanea looked at him, her voice low. "You still scared?" "Of what?" "Messing up, disappointing us." He paused. "Every day," she nodded. "Good. That means you'll keep choosing better." He kissed her forehead. Outside, the city didn't sleep, but inside this home, stillness reigned. Not the kind that hides wounds, the kind that honors healing, together, by choice, by change, by love. If this story moved you, pause for a moment. Not for us, for yourself. For the strength it takes to walk away from pain. For the courage to return when healing feels possible. For the love that grows not through grand speeches, but through small, consistent action. Did you see a piece of yourself in Zanea's journey? In Kyle's quiet transformation? In Chiari's laughter? Then this channel is for you. We tell stories that reflect your power, your heartbreak, your second chances, and the lessons that shape who you become. So if you're still here, it's not by accident. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to join our family and leave a comment, even one word, that says, "I'm still standing," because you are, and we see you. Until next time, this is Mr. Charles Stories, where every heartbreak has a purpose, and every ending is a new beginning.